What happens when your worst fear becomes your reality? Hi, I'm Brent Cassity. Welcome to the Nightmare Success In and Out podcast, where we explore how to overcome your fears and nightmares and set yourself free. We're going to be exploring this topic with guys I was in Leavenworth with and others who survived their own nightmare. These stories can be inspiring, sometimes sad. There's some humor, but hopefully you can come away with a nugget of something that'll help you knock down some of the prisons you built up in your own mind. All right, welcome back, Nightmare Success In and Out listeners. This is where you come for what happens when your worst fear becomes your reality. How do you adapt, survive, overcome, set yourself free? Don't forget to follow, subscribe, share this thing out, share the show out. We're starting season 4 here for Nightmare Success. I want to thank everybody for all the listens and comments and support. And several of you have shared people to interview, which I appreciate, like Lynn Espio, who has given me my current person I'm interviewing today. I appreciate that, Lynn. So the person I'm interviewing today, it's a lot of the different people that I've interviewed in the last year. Several of them have been out on the CARES Act. And for those who don't know, the CARES Act is a situation where when COVID hit, President Trump signed into this new order of letting a lot of people out of prison, nonviolent, and they fit a certain criteria. There's some people, when it first started, it was old, and then it was nonviolent. Then but the interesting thing about it is, it's been an interesting experiment because my guest, Wendy Lankton, she was sentenced to 15 years on a drug crime, which is a lot of years for somebody that was a first-time offender. And she was in for 3 years. She's been out for 4 years. And for a lot of the people, what they do is they go into home confinement, and they have certain rules that they have to follow, where they're going, how long they're going to be there. They got to be in by 9 o'clock. They get these phone calls. They have an ankle bracelet. It's quite a structured system to live under for a number of years. And I know a lot of people like Sabrina Morgan and others that have done that. But the interesting thing is the recidivism rate is extremely low. Like, it's less than 3%. And for all of you who have listened to this show, recidivism as a whole is around 75%. So I think it's interesting how this has worked. This CARES Act has worked for having an incentive out there for people to try to stay out and not be in prison. Wendy Lankton is a good example of that. She actually is making good use of her time too. She helped a lot of people while she was in prison with the CARES Act. First Step Act, helping people get out. I think her interest in all that led her into, she's a law school student now, trying to make the best of her time because she's an advocate for a lot of things about reentry, which we'll get into. I can't wait to jump into all that with Wendy Lankton. But before that, I want to recognize our show sponsor, Auto Plaza Direct. Who likes spending a couple of weekends walking car lots looking for a car? Not a lot of people like doing that on the weekends. Then you spend 4 or 5 hours in the dealership to buy a car. It's kind of like a root canal appointment. Well, there's a better way to take away all that pain and hassle of getting a car. It's called Auto Plaza Direct. They're your personal car concierge. Just tell them the car you want, what you can pay, and they'll go find that car for you. They'll negotiate your best price. They also offer you warranties and financing. It's all full service. Go to autoplazadirect.com to get started with your personal car concierge, the new hassle-free way, the car buying experience you deserve. Auto Plaza Direct. Tell them Brent from Nightmare Success sent you. Wendy Lankton, welcome in. How are you?
Hi, I'm fine. Thank you for asking.
So, Wendy, you, as I said, you were a 15-year sentence.
Yes.
Which is a lot. I mean, that'd take your breath away. And through that, you were 3 years. You've been home 4 years. What's that been like?
Very surreal. Like when you said about it taking your breath away, like when I was being sentenced, because I did do a plea deal, and when I realized that was going to be the sentence that I was going to get, it felt it felt like the end of the world.
Sure.
I'd never been in trouble of any kind before, so I didn't know the system. I didn't know that I would really technically only do about 12 years of that, and I didn't know about all the things like the drug and alcohol treatment programs you can take to get some time off, things like that. And the First Step Act was just sort of this vague idea. I'm not even sure that it had passed just yet.
Yeah.
I think it passed just a little bit after I got sentenced. Like I'm talking like a month or two.
Yeah.
Um, so I didn't have much hope. My big plan was that because I'm a dual citizen and even though I was born in the US and lived half my life here, I lived in Montreal for 20 years. And so I wanted to go back home to my kids and family and stuff. And so my big hope that I was hanging on was that I could get a treaty transfer and go back and at least, get something ironically a little more akin to what I'm doing now. Um, that was what I was hanging my hope on. What I didn't know at the time is that although it says in all the literature, like you are entitled to ask for a treaty transfer, unless you can't live in the US, they really aren't very big on putting you there because what they don't want is to treaty transfer you to like Canada or Mexico, wherever,
Well, Canada is hard to
and then
get
you come
into,
back.
and Canada is hard to get into anyway as an ex-felon.
It can be, but
I mean, I
I
know you
always
can get.
encourage people to ask and try because it's a lot more I don't want to say urban legend
Well, I
exactly.
think it has to
The
do
myth
with
is a lot
violence and all
bigger
that.
than the bite.
What your charge is, yeah. But
Yeah,
there is a restriction, as
there
there are
is.
in other countries that a lot of people aren't aware of. But um, Canada is one of those that has a restriction. I do know that I've got friends that have traveled to Canada that have uh, that I served time with, and they got an exemption. So
Yeah.
yeah, it definitely can happen. Well, Wendy, take us back a little bit, like before all this happened to you. Growing up as a kid, where were you? What was life like? Mom, dad, siblings, where were you?
Um, I grew up in Nebraska, mostly in rural southeast Nebraska, and then when I was like 11, I believe, we moved to Lincoln, which is the capital city, but not the biggest city, not by a long shot.
It's a Cornhusker city,
Yes.
Nebraska Cornhuskers. Yeah.
And so we lived there, and you know my parents struggled with their own addiction issues. My biological mother died when I was 4. I
Mm,
have very very fuzzy memories of her at best.
yeah.
My father married a woman who had a very good heart, but unfortunately she was also very troubled. And you know, I don't think she meant to make life difficult. I really don't. I'm just not that kind of person to think ill of people like that. But the result was, when somebody is hurt very badly and experiences a lot of trauma in their life and they don't get any real resolution for it, besides, you can tell yourself, I didn't deserve that. It wasn't my fault, all you want. But it's more than that. And, that can manifest in some really ugly ways. So, I was party to that as well. My father, unfortunately, was dealing with his alcoholism issues a lot, and he wasn't as present as he should have been. And I'm not dragging my dad when I say that. My dad would come on here and tell you the exact same
Yeah.
thing. He's been sober for like 35 years
That's
now
great.
next month. Yeah.
Great.
And so he's very accountable for, what happened. Um,
Did you have
I can't
siblings, Wendy,
Yeah, I
growing up?
have two brothers that were 6 and 8 years younger than me. Unfortunately, my brother, who was 6 years younger than me, died in a terrible car wreck when he
Mm,
was 16 and I
mm,
was 21. It was just before my 22nd birthday. Or no, I was 22. It was just before my 23rd. Um, and my other brother is 8 years younger than me. And then when my dad got sober, he married for the third time. This time he got it right. Him
that's,
and his wife have been together for like, what are we, 2024? Okay, they've been together for 30 years.
that's great.
and they had 2 kids as well. And I have one brother who is an Air Force captain. He lives in Italy, and he is 28. No, he's 30 now. Yeah, he's 30. And my youngest brother is, well, if my daughter's 25, that means Luke is 26. So
Wow.
yeah, that's
Wow.
the youngest. So my dad basically raised kids for 40 years straight.
That's incredible.
Yeah.
So in your world growing up, things were a little hectic.
Yeah.
Sounds like addiction issues, maybe a hard stepmom, and in some ways.
Mhm.
Was what? How was school? Was that an escape for you? Did you like
Yes.
school? Yeah.
School was very much an escape. I was killer at school until probably like I was about 14 or 15. And then you have to remember that that was like the late 80s, early 90s. So girls didn't have ADHD back then. Like to them, ADHD was a 12-year-old boy who didn't know how to sit down and shut up.
Yeah.
It wasn't yet, we didn't realize, the girl looking out the window who, you call on her and you say, Wendy, what's the answer to this? And she's like, what class am I
Where
even
are
in?
we?
Yeah, like, we didn't know it was that then. So my grades, once I got around like 14 or 15, I couldn't cover enough anymore. And I would have either A's or an F. And I got out by the skin of my teeth. My grades were all over, mostly A's, but there were a couple of F's there, like in, I'm trying to remember, like advanced physics or something like that, because I was always in all the advanced placement classes because I was also gifted. And
Yeah.
I'm like, I think I'm an over tester, because they would say, some people are under testers, they underperform on tests. I'm like, no, I
I
overperform.
overtest on.
Yeah, and they're like, Wendy, there's no such thing as that. I was like, yes, there is. So that was difficult for me, and so I didn't know how to handle that or what to do with it. Um, at that point, I just kind of decided that I just wanted to get married and have kids, and live happily ever after, and didn't make the best choices in that at first. So
So, Whitney, I'm curious. Did that affect you in any way, like as a kid growing up with your mom dies at 4 years old, your dad has addiction issues or is an alcoholic? Did you fall into any of that, like as a teenager, or were you totally? Because you
no,
go one or two ways. You take a fork in the road, or you go exactly the way your parents are, or you go exactly the opposite. Where did you fall into that?
I guess both eventually, but as a teenager, I was a goody two shoes, really. Like I didn't do anything besides chase boys.
Okay,
Like that
that
was
was your sport.
my yeah, that was my sport. And in very unhealthy, needy ways, that
Yeah,
were just super wrong, to put it mildly.
looking back,
Yeah, but like, I mean, I give myself grace. I'm like, I was, 14, 15, 16-year
sure.
old kid, like,
Yeah,
who didn't really have any proper like role models in adulting, and I didn't know what I was doing. Like, if that was my kid now, if I got me as a foster kid or something, like, what would I tell them? Oh, I would love on them. I wouldn't drag them. So why? I'm not going to drag myself,
yeah.
But yeah, that was my unhealthy outlet. I mean, I think I drank like on 2 occasions before I was 21, and it was never like drunkenness drinking.
Hmm.
That didn't come until after I was 21, and even then, I didn't drink like an idiot until I was really my late 20s, early 30s, and even my late 20s. Nobody would have really been concerned outside of like very conservative places,
Sure. Well,
and yeah,
Wendy,
so then it
like,
just got worse and worse.
so when you said you decided this is, I'm getting out of school, I want to get married, want to have kids. How old would you have been when you jumped into that world of marriage and kids?
I was 19 when I got married the first time.
19.
Yeah. And we were just completely wrong for each other, and I was 19.
How long
I wanted to
how
get
long did you
married. He was a decent enough human being, and we were completely wildly incompatible, if for no other reason than that, like, he didn't want kids.
Yeah.
What was I doing?
Because you want
I
to get
thought
married and have kids.
like he was 24 and that he was
Just
just
change
being
his mind.
silly. He'll get over it.
Sure.
And within a year, that was done. On my account, I was like, no, this isn't going to work, and I ended things. I got married then again very quickly to my second husband, who lived in Canada, where I had my first two kids with him. And that wasn't bad at all. He was a really truly good man. But like, we had two kids, and our first son was profoundly autistic. We lost his mother like when we'd only been married a year or two. My brother died like when we'd only been married a year or two. We had all of these tragedies all at once, and of course I acted like a complete idiot, didn't handle things appropriately or maturely. And you know we ended up splitting up by my choice and actions for the most part. So I stayed in Canada. I got my poli-sci degree. I did go to university.
Oh, I'm a
And,
poli sci person.
yeah.
How about that?
And it was good. And when I was in university, that was when I met my third husband. And he was supposed to be the forever guy.
Sure.
We were very compatible. We were like 30 and 28 when we got married. Like, we were happy. We loved each other madly. We wanted the same things in life. And unfortunately, I didn't realize that he had a lot of demons.
Okay. So
And
third time wasn't a charm.
no, sadly, very sadly. And, you know, the biggest problem with that was not that he had demons, but that I had never seen anybody deal with somebody like that. So to me, the choices were either like dump him or put up with it. And whereas I then had, these two little kids, and I really wanted to make this marriage work because I did love him,
Mm-hmm.
I stayed with him, but nothing ever changed. It was always the same. And, he's still, for the record, the same today.
Yeah.
And which is sad too. But now that I'm not his wife, I'm not as invested anymore. So we ended up splitting up. But when we split up, I always had told him, I refuse to divorce you. If you don't want to be married anymore, fine, but you're going to divorce me. You're not just going to sit here and act like a jerk until I divorce you. If you want to end this, be a man, say fine, bye, and I thought that he never would.
So
And he did.
at that time, Wendy, you were raising kids. It doesn't sound like you had gone out. I know you got a degree. Did you go out and do a job, or were you doing the
I
mom thing?
worked for him. He
Okay.
was a solo practicing attorney, and I was his admin everything.
Got it. Makes
I
sense.
handled the phones, the files,
Yeah.
like all of that, prepped
Okay.
him, dealt with clients. Yeah.
Yeah.
One time I heard Tina Turner talking about how one thing that she would always be grateful to Ike for was that he taught her how to work, and that she would never be poor thanks to him because he taught her how to make money.
Yeah.
And my exes never hit me, but when you've been beaten down emotionally that hard, I knew exactly what she meant.
Mm-hmm.
Because, and I have told him since then, if nothing else, you taught me skills that if he hadn't taught me those kind of skills, I wouldn't have known how to navigate bureaucracy to get out of prison the way I did.
Yeah.
I wouldn't have the job that I have now because I
The
wouldn't have had the
confidence.
skills to do
Yeah.
it, so I did learn things, and it was good. But unfortunately, when we split up, my youngest two were 3 and 5, I think, at the time. Yeah. And I lost my mind. I completely lost it. I was drinking all the time anyway to cope with his behavior while we were married. That just increased when we split up. And one day I was at a party, and I wasn't in the mood to party. I was just there, like, because I felt that I should leave the house. Like, there's a block where I don't remember anything for like a 6-month period, not because of drugs or alcohol, but because I was so traumatized. Like I've just blocked it out.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, somebody said to me, do you want to do a line of heroin? Now, keep in mind, I'd never done this before in my life. And I was like, yeah, that sounds like a great idea. I mean, somebody could have said, hey, you think we should light your hair on fire? And I probably
Sounds
would
like
have
a
been
great
like, yeah,
idea.
it sounds fantastic.
Yeah.
You know, I just wasn't into it. But as anybody who's ever experienced, you know, opiates after a surgery or something knows, it was fantastic. Everything was fine. I felt great. You know, I didn't have the searing pain physically or emotionally anymore.
Mm-hmm.
And I kept that up and I ran with it.
So from
And
that day, you were addicted.
I would go back and forth for a period of about 6 months, and wasn't even six. That was in June when that happened. In October, I remember I actually sat down with the guy I was dating at the time, I would also later end up married to, and who became my co-defendant. Um, for those keeping track at home, that
That's
guy is
4.
husband number 4. Yeah.
If you're playing the board game, we're at 4.
Right. And, you know, I remember telling him in October of that year that I was making a conscious decision that I was just going to use opiates because I felt so much better. It was enabling me to manage my depression. I was able to get out of bed and be functional.
Right. Rationalizing all of it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then he decided, for reasons I don't understand, that it would be a great idea for us to move to Omaha, where my family was. I guess he just wanted a change of scenery, a change of pace, or whatever. Well, he blamed his lack of good employment on the fact that he doesn't speak French and we were living in Montreal.
Mm-hmm.
No, the reason he wasn't well employed was because he was a drug addict. Okay.
Right.
Like, that was why.
Didn't
All
have
right.
to do with speaking French.
Yeah, it didn't have anything to do with that. Didn't have anything to do with the Asperger's, because there are plenty of people who manage both in that town, and they're raking in bucks. It's that
Elon
he,
Musk has done well with Asperger's.
yeah, it's that he didn't want to be a part of society that way, and it fit his narrative better. And you know, he was a drug addict, and it screwed
Did
up
you feel
everything.
like that you were, or not really?
No, I felt that I was making a
You were
conscious
managing
choice
it.
to medicate myself. Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
So we moved to Omaha, and I always had a rule that I didn't do drugs in the US because the US penalties are so much more insane.
Mm-hmm.
So I started going to the methadone clinic there, and everything was fine. But I didn't have a job at that time, and my now ex was very uh financially stingy and stuff, and he didn't like the fact that I was spending money on the methadone clinic. So he was like, why are you wasting your time with that when I can just make you stuff? Okay, fine. So he started making stuff, and I got the brilliant idea of sharing. And so he was making it and I was sharing it, and you know, we got caught because I was a lawyer's wife for 10 years.
Yeah.
So to me, when a cop stops me and asks me something, my response is, I want a lawyer.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I thought that everybody knew this. No, apparently everybody runs their mouth. My entire discovery is full of Officer Jones stopped Frank at a stop sign, and Frank said, I know about a fentanyl ring. You know, like people just volunteered information, you know, happily without even needing to be asked, including our co-defendants, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And so I got thrown under the bus as a big ringleader, and they said that Ken, my ex, and I had to sign the same plea agreement. And it was one of those things where they knew that he was making it and that this would have never happened without him.
Right.
But they also knew that all of their evidence was on me. So, because I was the one out in public selling it.
Right.
So,
sharing.
Exactly. So then that was
let's
night. Yeah.
Well,
That's
no,
how I ended up in
I
prison.
I can imagine what's I thought it was interesting when Lynn was telling me a little bit about your story is that here you are, this woman who is in Montreal, and she's got an attorney husband. She's working, and then somehow you end up in Omaha, and then you end up at this drug ring, and then you go to prison. It's like, wait, what? What
A bad
happened? How
80s
did it
hair
happen?
metal video is how
It's like,
somebody described my life one time.
I was like, what? That seems like that happened, like something flipped.
Yeah.
So, well, before we get into that, let's take a break here so I can recognize our show sponsors, because I want to talk about the how this happened, and then the experience of you getting the sentence that you got and how you rolled into prison that way. Before we do, I want to recognize, for those out there, and I know a lot of you, there's, you don't think you can manage your reputation online. It's like, it's everywhere. And then there's a negative story. Well, there's hope. It's called Online Reputation Solutions. It can help you whether you're building a reputation from scratch, repairing your search results after a negative news story, or even if you're just trying to position yourself a little better against the businesses that you compete. Online reputation solutions can also help you as you're portrayed on these popular AI searches, like Chat GPT. By the way, you just put your name in, it'll just spit a whole lot of stuff out about you. I did that the other day, and it's amazing. So Drew Chapin can also help you with that. That's the guy who does all this. To learn more, visit onlinereputation.solutions. It's not .com, it's .solutions. They're even launching a do-it-yourself SEO option. It's a course for individuals who want to take on their search results on their own budget and speed. Listeners of Nightmare Success can take $100 off the DIY SEO course with coupon code Nightmare Success. Check this out if you're worried about anything online. I know a lot of you who listen to this show, and I know Drew Chapin, who does this online reputation, and he's real good. He helped me build my website. He's a really smart guy. He's from the tech world. And so if you're looking for help, you feel like you're overwhelmed, check this out, onlinereputation.solutions. And the other part of this is the Nightmare Success podcast is sponsored by the White Collar Support Group. It's the world's first support group devoted to people navigating the white collar criminal justice journey. I'm a member of the White Collar Support Group, and I can tell you that this is a bunch of people who help each other through the criminal justice journey for free. Whether you're just starting your journey or you've made it through to the other side, this is great space for you. You can join us on Zoom Monday, 7 p.m. Eastern Time. For information, go to prisonist.org. That's prisonist.org. And we've got a White Collar Conference coming up October 19th. It's going to be great. We've got a lot of rock stars from the reentry world. Go to whitecollarconference.com and register, and we'll see you there October 19th. Starts at 9 a.m. Eastern Time. So, Wendy, you get caught up in all this. Everybody's talking about you. You're this being made out to be a gigantic ringleader who has an addiction issue.
Yeah.
And you're making this at home. So how do you get contacted?
You mean like how did I get it?
Like, do you feel the heat's coming on you? Do
Oh,
people
yeah.
say, hey, I just talked to a police officer. I just talked to an investigator. I just talked to the FBI. Were people telling you that they were talking, or was it just like, boom, all of a sudden you are tagged?
I felt that like a lot of the people that we were dealing with and, meeting through this kind of activity, I felt that they were very volatile and unreliable,
Yeah.
like they would just do dumb things, like get themselves in jail for like driving around in a vehicle with no plates. And I'm like, what are you doing when you've got like, kids, it's Nebraska, so everybody's doing meth. And I'm like, you've got a quarter ounce of meth in your pocket. Why are you doing things like that? Or they would get into a hotel room because there's this quasi homeless like society where people don't really have anywhere to stay, but they just rent these hotel rooms at discount rates and stay in those. They would get in one with like their girlfriend, and they would get into a whole domestic violence situation, and the police would come. And I'm like, you've got 3 handguns and a bunch of meth in your room. What are you doing?
Yeah.
And I just felt that was some really dumb behavior. They would get in fights with each other. They would rob each other and stuff. We're like, what is wrong with you people? Because I was used to being in Canada where people were a lot more civilized about that sort of thing. It just, that kind of stuff happens, but not most of the time. And I was just like, this is weird, so I didn't really trust them, and people would tell me like, oh, so and so is working for the cops, and I would kind of wonder, and
Make you paranoid.
it made you kind of paranoid and stuff.
Yeah.
So I just always had a feeling that it would be coming. And then in August 2022, not 2022, August 2017,
Mm-hmm.
they came and raided us for the first time.
What was that
But
like?
we had just ran out of everything, so we didn't have anything on us. We had nothing. And they didn't realize how much the computers were involved at the time, like where we were getting our supplies.
Mm-hmm.
So they didn't take our computers. So they had nothing besides 3.5 grams of meth in my pocket and a single barrel manual shotgun. I don't know anything about guns in the
Mm-hmm.
closet that wasn't for like weaponry or anything, but I didn't know how to shoot a gun, so we were gonna teach me target practice and stuff. Like
Mm-hmm.
it
We're
wasn't.
living in Omaha. You might need it.
Yeah, exactly. So like, yeah, so that was it. And this is where I where I first realized that this was going to be a little different than I had been expecting. Um, so the police get through tossing our house after we've sat on our front lawn with our hands tied behind our backs for like 5 hours, and the cops
Were
holds
you
up.
scared, Wendy?
Yes,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, I was totally. And the cop holds up, but I'm also very much a person who's like,
Are the kids
well,
there?
no, the kids
Okay.
were at home with their dad. They
That's
had left
fantastic.
just the day before, and
Okay.
I later asked the cops, like, "Did you guys do that on purpose?" And he said, "Well, we knew they were leaving on that day." And I was like, "Thank you."
That's nice. Yeah.
Yeah. And so, yeah, so we'd been sitting out there for 5, 6 hours, and the cop holds up the baggie of meth that he had found on me, 3.5 grams. That's a single serving, basically, and he says, so Wendy, you can either tell me where you got this or you can go to jail. Or you can go to the jail. And I was like, okay, I'll go to the jail, because you don't tell on people like that. You just
Mm-hmm.
don't. Now, where I was from in Montreal, if somebody had been caught like that, they would go down to the jail, they would be booked, they would spend like maybe 10, 12 hours there, and they would go home. So
Mm-hmm.
I was like, yeah, sure, I'll go down to the jail. Cool. And because that's what I get. So, suck it up.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. What I didn't realize was that in Nebraska, you go to jail and you sit there until the judge sees you for your arraignment. And that
Mm.
can be anywhere from 2 to 3, sometimes 5 days later.
Mm-hmm.
So I go down there and I'm sitting there for 3 days, and I wasn't scared of the people I was with. People are just people. That wasn't the issue. What I was scared of was I did not want to go into withdrawal,
Mm-hmm.
which I knew I was going to start in about 3 days if I didn't get the hell out of there and get myself fixed. And I just didn't want to be there permanently. And I looked around, and this will tell you how off my thinking is at that time. Okay. I look around and I see all of these women with like their roots grown way, way out. Like it looks bad. And I remember thinking to myself,
They've been there for a while.
well, I thought, the end is probably coming soon for this little fantastic journey of yours. And if you're going to get locked up for a while, you don't want to be looking like that. So you better dye your hair back to your natural color. And when I got out, I did exactly that. Yeah, I didn't
That's not
stop.
something
I
I would
didn't
have
go to
thought either.
rehab. I didn't,
You
get
were
a
thinking about your
lawyer.
hair color.
I made sure my hair was okay so that when I went back, I didn't have a demarcation line. Yeah.
Uh-huh.
Mhm.
Uh-huh. So, Wendy, I know these things can take all kinds of different paths when somebody gets hit, and because a lot of times what happens is when they hit you, they've done a lot of investigation up to that point and they have all the questions already answered.
Mhm.
Was that the situation with yours, or was it a long process from the time you were arrested till the time that you were looking at the judge and him telling you what your sentence was?
No, it was pretty short. Like they pretty much knew everything. And they knew who to pick up to like poke them, be like, why don't you tell us everything, and
Hmm.
there's one girl in particular, she was one of my co-defendants' girlfriends, and she ran her mouth about everything, but she was also high as a kite when she did it, and they scared the living shit out of her. And her
Hmm.
dad got his friend who was a lawyer, but he was like a corporate lawyer, not a criminal lawyer.
Hmm.
And he was like, you got to tell them everything, or they're going to lock you up forever. And she was like, ah. So she did. But she never lied to me about it, so I don't care. I mean, what am I going to do? Be mad at somebody like that for the rest of my life? Really?
Yeah.
Like, I'm sober now. I've been sober for 7 years. Like, I'm not going to get mad at somebody who she was like 21 years old at the time, and the cops are sitting there. Come on. Like, I have kids that age. Like, I can't sit there and no, we're not going to do that. So
So you
that
did, I
happened.
mean, did you immediately know that you were going to do a plea bargain?
No, I
No.
didn't know for sure about that until I don't know, maybe like 3 or 4 months later. And I started really researching, and I had people send me books, and tell me about this. And I had a wonderful defense attorney,
I'm trying to
absolutely
remember,
wonderful
Wendy,
guy.
because you guys are co-defendants in this situation. Were you able to talk to each other about the case as it was going forward?
No, we both talked to his parents,
Okay.
and they would kind of be like, oh, he says hi. Oh, he wants to know this. It wasn't like long diatribes or anything,
Yeah.
but, so we knew basically how each other were and what was going on.
But you weren't together.
No, we definitely weren't.
So you had a good defense attorney, which
I
is
had a
good.
very good defense attorney. He was also born and raised in Canada, so we kind of bonded over that. And he also had genetic eye problems that he was born with, like I do. So we bonded over that too. And he was very he was sympathetic without being coddling, which is a
Hmm.
very fine line to walk.
Hmm.
And he helped me out a lot, just like mentally. He would come get me very often, like at least 2 or 3 times a month, and just to talk and see where I was and stuff. And he would tell me how things went. He showed me all of the discovery, which I found out later is something that a lot of defense attorneys don't do.
Right.
And we went through every single page, so that was how I knew everybody who said everything,
So were
and
you guys in this, as they would have probably, I'm sure PSR had you sounding like you were a gigantic drug kingpin, but were you making good money with this?
we couldn't put together $300 to get a friend of ours out of town to go on a bus to go
So it
see his
really
family.
wasn't a good
No,
business proposition for you guys.
no, because everything we brought in,
Yeah.
we turned around and spent on supplies to make more, to get
Hmm.
more, or to buy
And it
meth,
didn't
or to
help
buy
that you were an
toys.
addict at the time either.
Yeah, and I mean, I
And
would
I
be
found I found
like,
that interesting too. When I was in prison, a lot of the guys that I was with, um, you know, what I found out time and time again, a lot there were some guys that were really good and they had a distribution network and commissions
sure,
and everything, and they were running a business. It was just illegal, but then there were others who were just addicts and they were
yeah,
feeding their habit. However they could feed their habit, and that got them into sales, and that's got them hit, and then that they go up and down the chain on that. So
yeah.
with your good defense attorney, when do you find out what your proposition is for time?
Well, they came at us in, I want to say March, because we got arrested in October. Okay. And in March, they came at us with a plea deal for 19 and a half years, based, and they were also going to give my then husband and I a superseding indictment because a guy overdosed.
Mm,
And like there are people like who, how you get in a nitpicky fights with somebody. There are people who would just sit there and talk about me and be like, oh, like she killed people on her case. And I'm like, if I killed people on my case, believe me, they would have put that in my superseding indictment. Okay, like that you don't get away with a fentanyl case where you killed somebody and they don't come at you for it, because they will. And no, nobody freaking died. This guy OD'd and then ran his mouth. But what was bizarre was that they never actually proved that that was my stuff. He just told them it was. And he told them that because he had about $4,000 worth of product from me, because it's not like I was some gangster or whatever. And he never got around to paying me back. And he and another friend robbed a jewelry store and tried to give me like gold bars to pay me back. And I was like, you people are crazy. I don't want a gold bar. Like, no. I was like, listen, don't worry about it. We're good. I don't care. I'm just not going to give you any more product. Bye. Have a nice life. And no. Oh, he thought that was just completely unreasonable. So when he went and OD'd himself, he ratted me out instead of his new supplier.
Mm.
Yeah.
So you're standing in front of the judge.
Well, they offered 19 and a half years. And I said, if you're going to put me in prison, I told my defense attorney, I said, if they're going to put me in prison for 19 and a half years, they might as well put me in for life, because at that point, my kids will be grown up. And what's the point? I'll be old. Like, I'm not, why am I going to get out and start myself a life and try to fund my own retirement at that point? Forget it, And he didn't want me to take it either. He was like, well, I already took the liberty of telling her no. He was more colorful in his description, but yeah. Mm-hmm. So he said no. And I was shooting for 10. I wanted 10. I was willing to settle for 10. That seemed reasonable to me. I could handle that. I didn't want 10, but I would deal with it. It seemed like what everybody, it seemed, when I looked at what I did,
in a lot of cases, right?
Yeah, it seemed sensible. Mm-hmm. And then, they said no, 15. And me and my attorney wanted to talk them down to 12 or 12 and a half for reasons I will never understand. My ex and his attorney were like, no, we have to take this because, like, who cares, Wendy? Just sign it. We're just going to transfer to Canada. And I said, there is no guarantee we can transfer to Canada. And they were like, yes, it is. It says right there that we're entitled to a transfer. I said, yeah, it says we're entitled. That doesn't mean they have to give it. Mm-hmm. Like, hello, why do I have to tell people these things? But nobody listens to Wendy, So, but I was kind of backed into a corner where, and finally I decided 2.5 years wasn't worth fighting over for this. So I was just like, whatever, fine, let's do 15. I don't care anymore. I'm done fighting. So we signed for 15.
Wow. So how long do you have to wait between the time that did they immediately remand you, or do you have time between that and
I was held on pretrial. I never got out. I was arrested October 30th, 2017. I was sentenced on October 26th, 2018. And I spent that entire time in county. And then I spent about another month in county. No, it was about 3 weeks. Then they transferred me to the Core Civic in Leavenworth, Kansas. And I stayed there for like 3 months. And then I went to the transfer center for like 4 weeks, I think.
In Oklahoma?
Yeah. And then from there, I went to Danbury, and I arrived there February 12th, 2019.
Wow.
Yeah.
You did quite a journey.
Yeah.
Travel, which
I saw many places.
Travel as a prisoner, by the way. And nobody wants to stay in county jail that long. You were in jail for over a year. That's a long time. So you get to Danbury, and you've already been all around the world. What was it like getting to Danbury?
It was great. I used to always say when I was in county that clearly the purpose of county is to make me so miserable that I am excited to go to prison.
Yeah.
And I was thrilled. I was like, fantastic. I can't wait to go to prison, because people who had been to federal prison before were telling me about it and what it would be like and stuff. Mm-hmm. And it sounded like freaking Disneyland compared to where we were. And, people always joke, that federal prison isn't, it's cushy and that, it's not real prison. Okay, that's a lie. But compared to county, it's paradise.
Yeah, county's rock bottom.
Yeah, so it was very nice. And there was a moment, now keep in mind, it's February 2019. I literally, other than when walking from a vehicle to a plane, have not seen the outdoors
Mm-hmm.
since, a year and a
A
half.
year. Yeah.
Yeah, over a year at this point.
Yeah.
So I walk out, and because we arrived at Danbury at night, because it was, winter, so it's dark at like 5 o'clock there. So we arrived, and it was like 6 p.m., and it was dark, so we don't really see anything. And we walk in, and the next day they tell us to go over to the commissary because they're going to let us shop because, we don't have anything.
Mm-hmm.
So we walk over there, and I open the door of the building to go to the commissary building. And to my right, I see, and it opens up into this valley. And I just like gasped. I was like, because it was like all these pine trees. You could see the sun glistening on Candle something lake. I can't remember what it's called,
I
but
thought you were going to say the barbed wire.
no, there's the barbed wire's on like a different part of the prison there. But it was beautiful. And it was East Coast, so it was all pine trees and hills and stuff, and it felt like a home. And I was just like, oh, thank you, God. I was so freaking happy. And when we had got there the night before, we made our beds and stuff, and I was all cheerfully making my bed because it was a real bed, like a real mattress.
Yeah.
And because, in county we had gym mats, which at least the gym mats that we had at the county I was at were actually filled with filling. The gym mats we had at Leavenworth were literally a tarp, some of them, because they were so old. They were just done.
Yeah.
So, yeah, like I was making my bed. I was a little happy. And one of the girls in there who was, had been there a minute, she was like, you weren't out on pretrial, were you? And I was like, nope. She's like, that's why you're so happy. I was like, yep. And then they shut off the lights at night. And that was the first time that I'd slept in the dark in a year and a half. Wow. So I was absolutely thrilled. It was magic, like I was comparatively. Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, I wasn't happy to be away from my children. I wasn't happy to have, limitations and restrictions on my communication with them, all kinds of stuff. But like,
it was so much better than where you were.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
100%.
No, I can only identify. I was 6 days because they took me from there after I was in for about a year and a half into my civil trial, and I was in a county jail for 6 days, and I couldn't wait to get back to Leavenworth, which sounds really strange, but it's just so much different. And there's so many different things that goes on in a jail. It's transitory. Somebody could be in there for DWI, or somebody could be in there because they just stabbed somebody to death, or it's a very wide ranging, chaotic place. Yeah, and you're locked down all the time, so it's a weird place to live, and to live as long as you did. That's a long time to not be outside, which would have driven me crazy. So when do you get into this Danbury world? What was, for you, obviously feeling like you're in a better place? How did you walk into it as far as getting in part of that world?
I mean, I was in a really good mood, all things considered. And the thing that I was most happy about was that I knew that my kids were going to be able to come see me, because Danbury is only like 5 hours from Montreal.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not a short trip, but compared to the distance between Omaha and Montreal, it's great, and they did come, and, my ex brought them, my daughter came, and
how old were your kids then?
They were like, let's see, they were like 10 and 8.
Okay.
Yeah. And, like, we never told them how long I was supposed to be there. We decided that we were not going to tell them until it became necessary, So we just said for a while, and then they're going to transfer her up here. Might be a year or so, because we thought that it would be maybe something like that. And then I was denied for my first treaty transfer request, which anybody with any experience in this knows they always deny the first time. But I didn't know that. So I cried. I thought I was going to be stuck at Danbury for another 10 years, and I was just devastated. And uh, uh, yeah, it was sad. But I mean, it's a camp, and like probably a third of the women there, no, I would say more like half, are there on like white collar offenses, and they're either like women who had professional jobs like doctors, lawyers, accountants, whatever,
Hmm.
or they like were money laundering for their drug dealer boyfriends.
Hmm.
So it's not like there was anybody there who felt that they needed to like be, the head bitch in charge, for lack of a better term, that they needed to be running the show and needed to like front and,
Hmm.
make everybody miserable. Like, no, there was some of that like petty girl drama with each other, but I never got into that, because I just didn't care. I used to always tell people there's three reasons you get into a fight in prison. You're running your mouth, which means you're either just talking too much and like bothering people, or you're snitching,
Hmm.
or you stole something from somebody,
Hmm.
or you're not paying your bill or something.
Hmm.
Okay. So always make sure you have your
Hmm.
stuff paid, or you're fooling around with somebody's girlfriend or boyfriend or husband or whatever, either outside or inside. I've seen it
Hmm.
happen both
Yeah.
scenarios.
Yeah.
So don't do that.
Yeah.
It's not that hard to stay out of fights, if you're going to a camp like that. So, it was agreeable and I found things to do. I started working with the construction crew. We were rehabbing the staff housing there. I was painting and putting in doors, and it was nice.
Yeah. So I think it's interesting too that like usually you at a camp level you have to be at 120 months. So you were able to be at a camp level above that.
Time is not a security risk factor for women for some reason.
Isn't that interesting?
I don't know why. Maybe we don't escape as much, or maybe it's just a way to weed down the men, because
Yeah.
obviously the population disparity is
Yeah.
huge. There's
Right.
way more men than women. So,
But I just learned something new as we're just talking. I did not know that until you were talking. I thought, well, she had to have been in, she was 15 years. So obviously she was above the 120 months. So you get into an area where a lot of people who were in prison didn't experience, that's COVID hit.
hmm.
What was that like, Wendy? Because that's, you have certain things in prison that you kind of, it's part of your routine. You might work out, you might go walk, you might do this, you might do that, but it feels like those are your restricted freedoms that are yours. And then all of a sudden something hits where I'm sure they changed a lot of that.
Oh, yeah. Like, and I had a lot of freedom, even for somebody in the prison, because, like I said, I worked in construction and I did other errands. I was on snow crew, which meant they trusted me to go
Drive around
and
cars,
eh,
trucks. Yeah.
yeah, like a gator at night. And
Hmm.
but also like a lot of our staff housing bordered the outside world, so you
Hmm.
kind of had to walk on civilian streets in order to clean their sidewalks and stuff.
Hmm.
And so I was out there doing that in the middle of the night with nobody watching me. I mean,
Yeah.
I could have been to New York City before anybody would have noticed, but I
Right.
didn't. It wasn't that bad. I could handle it. So when COVID came, we saw warnings about like this thing was going on. And I was just blowing it off initially, like, in January and February, because like I remember when they tried to tell us that H1N1 was gonna,
Hmm.
be the end of the world or whatever, and like, it was nothing. And so I just thought that this was more, the media hype or whatever. And then things started to shut down, and I can't remember specifically what day it was, but I remember like it was either March 8th or the following weekend. They shut down visitation. They said, we're not going to do visitation this weekend. And I was like, this is really sad. The poor people who do, because there are a lot of people who have their family come
Sure.
every week.
Huge deal.
A huge deal. And I felt terrible for them. But, I figured like we would be done with this in a week or two, right?
Hmm.
And no, it wasn't like that at all. It was like being in county again,
Yeah.
because we were confined to our dorms, which for people who haven't experienced this, it's a giant room with, imagine an office cube farm, and instead of like desk and chair in each of those cubes, it's a set of bunk beds and 2 lockers. So that's where we were all the time, all day, every day, and every once in a while we would get an officer who was like, this is crazy. You guys just like open the door, go outside, get some fresh air, like, whatever. Because it was such a performance of trying to, do preventative measures, because they would tell us that we had to be on lockdown, in quarantine, but they would all walk through the other 2 prisons on the campus, because
Right.
there's
They would have been the only ones bringing it in also.
yeah, like, so
Going
it
home
was
and coming back.
performative. It was
Right.
totally performative. And, at first they wouldn't let us wear masks. Then they made us wear masks that were like these cloth masks that were absolutely useless. Like, it was awful. And the thing is, though, we were an hour outside of New York City, where it was hit really, really hard in the beginning. And a lot of the women that were in there had family that were hit really, really hard out there, or who were first responders or healthcare providers of some sort. And they were, really upset about it and stuff. And we couldn't talk to them as much. We got like 1 5-minute phone call a day with them. So, of course, like, I've been told that Danbury's a little bit unique in this, but we went from maybe like 5% of the population having access to a cell phone to, there was a point where there were about 125 women there, and there were no less than 50 cell phones, that people were passing around to like talk or whatever. And, people are just calling their families, like texting, like nobody was like doing drug deals and calling out hits. Like, it's a freaking camp. Come on. So that's how it happened. And,
when did you start hearing, Wendy, that there could be a significant shift in how they were going to handle this, and called the CARES Act? What
at the end of March.
Okay, so how did that information get to you? Did you see it on TV? Did you
It
hear it
was
from the staff? Where did it come
They
from?
put it on Core Links. They told us that
For those down in the Cayman Islands who are listening, Core Links is how it's communicated. It's like email from the prison out and in.
yeah.
Core Links, True Links.
Yeah, they put it on there. It was like a notice that Attorney General Barr had put out. I don't even remember the notice, but he put out some notice or whatever, and that was like, I don't know, like March 29th or something like that. And and people read it and they're like, yay, we're all going home. And I was like, we're not all going home, like I thought,
think you were going home?
Absolutely not. I was like, I'm not going anywhere. I have a 15-year sentence. My out date is in 2030. Like, that's not going to happen for me. But so I'm going to help you fill out your paperwork, because people had to fill out request forms, and there was like a process and all this. And so I helped them with it, And even when the BOP technically at first classified me as somebody who could go home, because they weren't doing time criteria yet. They were saying everybody who is like low risk, nonviolent. And I fit all of that. The only thing I did not fit was the time requirement. And I was like, yeah, they're not going to let me go home.
They were saying 50%, right?
Right. Yeah, they came out with that later, because they realized that if they didn't add that, this is my suspicion anyway, they realized that if they did not add that time requirement, that they would lose probably 80% of their population. Yeah.
Right.
Because most people aren't violent, or So, okay, great. So I, didn't think anything of it. And then even when there was a lot of lawsuits, Danbury had the infamous one, where we took them to court. I still didn't think that I would be somebody who would go home. I did what I was supposed to do for the suit. They asked us to, tell them about our health and sign affidavits about the conditions and stuff. And I did all of that, but I still didn't think I was going home. And then...
And how long into this was this that you were doing all that? To where?
In August. Okay. On August 24th, Sorry, my voice is catching here.
So it's
'Cause
August. Yeah, August of 2020.
it's my youngest son's 9th birthday.
Okay.
They told me that I had been approved for home confinement.
Wow.
Now, that didn't mean that I was necessarily going home yet, because I knew that there was a lot of space in there.
Right. But
People
you'd
still
been
had to
approved
sign
for it.
off.
Right.
But this magical committee in Washington with the BOP had approved me, finally. And I was just like, oh my God. Like I just freaked because it was my son's birthday.
Wow.
And so I called their dad, and told him, and he had been, very like encouraging, like we were like war buddies during this. And so, we were like, this might happen. Well, then I was like, okay, how do I make this happen? Because then I had the problem where I didn't have anywhere to go. Yeah.
You're planning on
And
being in for a while.
yeah, like I didn't have a home. And here's where the story gets funny for the background. My father's wonderful third wife that he's been with for 30 years, she's a probation officer.
That is bizarre.
So I can't live with her. She can't have a felon living with her. That's not a thing. So
I mean, how crazy is that? Your dad's third wife is a probation officer.
yeah, my dad is huge in AA. Like I am the last person who had any excuse to end up where I did. It's embarrassing, honestly. Like it was terrible. So yeah, so I couldn't live with them, and my unit manager tried to convince my dad to just say yes and get me there, and they would move me in a couple of weeks. The problem was the people at the Omaha halfway house were very pissed off that this program was going on. They were blunt and told my dad that straight up, that they didn't think it was right and that we shouldn't be getting out at all, blah, 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 blah. And so they weren't going to be approving any of this unless they absolutely have to. And so they weren't approving me. So there. And my dad was like, now remember, my dad is Mr. Law and Order too. He's married to a probation officer. They were so annoying that my dad actually called up and made a complaint about them. And I'm like, wow, they must have been off the chain for my dad to be upset about it. So then it was, well, how do we get me out? Right. So, so the attorney who was working on the case, she said, she called, she had me call her one day. She told me to call her on Corlinks. And so I called her and she said, so we have some options for you. You could go to a halfway house in New Jersey. You could go to the Fortune Society in New York City. Or if all else fails, maybe you could come to my basement. And there's no guarantee the judge is going to sign off on any of these, but we're going to ask him. And I'm like, okay. I said, she said, do you have a choice of any of these? And I said, my preference is to go wherever the judge thinks I should go. Like I don't care,
just went up.
I will deal, I'll be fine. Okay. So they do. They go to court, and around the same time, COVID finally hits the camp. This is now in December. So they go into court for an emergency hearing, and the judge basically says, why are all these people who've been approved for months still there? Come back in 2 days and they better be gone, or you better have an explanation. And so they came back, and I was one of the people they had an explanation for, which was problems finding somewhere. And so they then had me go to what's it called? So then he wasn't wild about putting me on a plane anyway. So he had me go to the attorney's basement, which she basically had a whole mother-in-law unit type setup down there. So I basically had my own apartment. Yeah. He had me go there for 2 weeks to like quarantine, and said that we would figure it out during that 2 weeks. And we did. Connecticut probation allowed me to transfer, and I went to a sober living house, and the rest is history.
Wow. Wow. So where are you now?
Living happily ever after with the man I should have married 30 years ago. He's been sober since 1995. And the night that he told me that, I called up my best friend and said, I'm going to marry him.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, that's cool.
And I would have never met him if not for this journey. But that's a story for another podcast.
That's another story.
Yep.
That's so cool, though. So how did you guys meet?
I ran into him along the journey.
You ran into him along the journey. And so you get out, from you figure all this out,
Mm.
um, and so home confinement, because some of these people actually that listen to this know the word home confinement, but what does it mean to you, Wendy? Like, how do, in your life of home confinement, what is your life like?
Um, well, I've
Because you're
had the
4 years in, right?
yes,
Yeah.
and I've had the pleasure of having it a couple of different ways. I was initially watched by US probation on their federal location monitoring because I had that huge chunk of time.
Hmm.
The only halfway house in Connecticut at that time was in Bloomfield, and that was like an hour from where I was. I didn't have a car. And so they were like, you know what? We don't know how this is going to go. We don't want to approve this transfer and then throw her at the halfway house. Let's just see what happens. We'll watch her.
Okay.
Because at that time, we didn't know if they were going to call us all back in 3 months or not. We
Well,
didn't know.
no, that was a real fear, right?
Yeah. So they watched me, and that was restricted, but it wasn't a huge deal. I had an ankle monitor on. I had to submit an itinerary. I did not have to do the thing where you call every time you leave the house and come
Okay.
back.
Okay.
Um, it was fine. I didn't have to like come in. They came to me whenever they wanted to do spot check or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
They did not call me in the middle of the night. I didn't have any of
Yeah,
that, like a lot
I
of people
had
did.
that.
But when I moved to Buffalo to start pursuing my JD, then I went under halfway house supervision because, well, actually, first probation continued to watch me, and in fact, they put me on the thing where they take off your ankle monitor because they couldn't find an ankle monitor that would penetrate through my house walls because I live in an old building and the walls
Mm.
are like 20 feet thick, I guess.
Okay.
So they were constantly getting messages that I was gone when they knew damn well I wasn't.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, they could see, they
Yeah.
knew.
Yeah.
So they had me get on the system where you take your picture.
Okay.
And so I didn't have a monitor. I had my picture. I had a curfew. I could be out from 7 in the morning till 7 at night.
Okay.
That was pretty cool. Then the halfway house here started taking females. And so then I got switched to there because probation doesn't like to babysit for the BOP,
Mm-hmm.
technically that's where I am. So I went there, and that was like, it was kind of like going back to preschool,
Mm-hmm.
okay? Because I was like, I've been out for a bit, like whatever. But it's not that deep. I just call, tell them I'm here, where I'm going, like
Yeah.
it's not some horrible thing, like, but
It's
I'm
livable.
also very careful, and I've been watching other people do this for years. I
Yeah.
know people who have fallen asleep and not heard the phone ring and
And they
gotten
go
sent
back.
back to prison.
Yeah.
Like, so you're not going to catch this girl out like that. Nope. So I'm on it, watching what's going on, being careful, taking care of everything, and so,
Well, and I think the other
yeah.
cool thing, Wendy, is you've got a job and you also are doing some law school.
Hmm.
So you're not wasting your time. I mean, you're really using
No,
you're using your time in a really positive way,
I
and you're
should
an
have never
advocate, and
had
you're an
this
advocate for
chance.
things that you're passionate about, which is good because there's a lot of things in the reentry world that we need passionate people to advocate.
My thought is that I should have technically never had this chance.
Yeah.
There are plenty of people who deserve this just as much as I do. And, they're not any different than me. They have families who love them. They're not violent. They're first time offenders. They have a low pattern score. Just they weren't in the same circumstances I was. They weren't that lucky.
Yeah.
So I feel like the least I can do is help them if I get
Yeah.
a chance.
Yeah.
And the other is that when you get a privilege like that, you don't waste it.
Yeah.
Like the reality is, I walked out of prison on the backs of a million dead Americans.
Mm.
That's the reality. And I am very, very keenly aware of that. This wasn't just like a yay, that's fabulous. Like, do I think that this should be a constant program? Yeah, I do. But it would never have happened if all those people hadn't died.
Mm-hmm.
And I can't imagine anything more disrespectful than like to either their memory or to the family that they left behind, than to get out of prison to prevent me from having that same fate and to prevent my family from having that same problem, and getting out here and willfully doing stupid activities to get myself sent back in. Now,
Right.
getting sent back due to bureaucracy is another thing,
Right. It's a whole different
but
deal.
I don't need to be contributing to that.
Right.
And so I want to do my best and say, hey, you didn't waste this chance. It wasn't a bad choice. I can do this. Watch me.
I love it. I love it, Wendy. Um, what do you think's your biggest takeaway through all of it that you went through?
Be grateful. Be very, very grateful, because not everybody gets this. I know people who were approved and their paperwork just didn't make it around to all the 7 signatures that it needs, from the warden and the medical officer and all that. It just didn't make it by the end of May when the CARES Act ended, so they didn't get to go home, and they're stuck there until 2028 now.
Yeah, and there's a lot of people stuck, Wendy, just because there's not enough halfway house bed space.
Which is ridiculous, because
I
if
know,
you
but you know what? That's kind of the way the government works. You pass a law, and then no one's ready to take in what that all means,
But it's
and
crazy
how.
because the recommendations in the BOP's own recommendations say that for low risk people, the first choice should be home confinement, because the halfway
Exactly.
house might actually be worse for them because you're getting them around a bunch of people that they don't
I,
need to be
I
making
so
friends with.
amen to that. I did 8 weeks at the halfway house, and I was married and had a job and had a place to live, and
Yeah,
it was just it was a nightmare because it's
yeah.
St. Louis. Dismiss house is not a great dismiss house, or not a great halfway house. But all that being said, Wendy, I can't wait for you to be an attorney. I think you know that's the type of voice we need, is somebody who's gone through the system,
Yeah, me
understands
neither.
it, knows how to help people, knows why you help people, and those are great things, and I hope you can, keep all that motivation going, because I think you're going to be a big help to people, and I'm looking forward to seeing your name out there, continue to advocate, because you have an interesting story. I mean, you really do. From
Well, our
all the
next big
different things that you've,
advocacy is for clemency, so let's hope that happens.
there you go. Yeah. Well, and the work that you're doing now too, because I know you did some work with helping people with their housing for justice impacted people. Now you're working. Is it nationwide?
I work at a
Personal
nationwide
injury. Yeah.
law firm. Yeah, I don't
Yeah.
want to disclose who it is, just be to protect me,
Yeah. Yeah.
But people
Well,
who
I'm sure that's
need to
helpful for
know.
what you're trying to get done, and continue to educate yourself. So keep
Yeah,
doing it all, Wendy. Keep keeping on. Speaking of being grateful, I am so grateful for Homestead Financial here. These fancy lights and cameras and equipment, the studio. Um, Homestead Financial is a home mortgage company, and Greg Afdiev is the home mortgage guy. If you need anything with home mortgage, go to Greg Afdiev. He knows it all. If you're looking for a book out there, I've got one, Nightmare Success. Check it out. It's on Amazon and Barnes and Noble. If you got time, please leave me a review on Apple. That helps the show. A lot of you have, and I so appreciate that. I got a fancy new website that's about a month old. It's brentcassity.com. I spell it wrong. It's where the TY, not a DY. And as I used to say when I was sending my emails out from Leavenworth, stay strong. I'll do the same. Wendy Lankton, thank you so much for being with us today. It's a great story. I can't wait to see what you do next.
thank you, Brent.
Nightmare Success, in and out.